Since 2009, it has been our goal to support, promote, engage, and inspire the arts community by igniting the ghost light that shines on the stages of the up-and-coming, the unsung heroes, the brilliant writers, and the dynamic designers. Our podcast breaks the fourth wall to give you an inside look at the plays and the players. Stay tuned. Rep Radio is on the air. Welcome to Rep Radio. I'm your host, Darnell Radford, and today I am at Theater Exile in South Philly. And I am here with the super busy Matt Pfeiffer. Matt, welcome back to Rep Radio.
Thanks for having me, Darnell.
So glad we got a chance to chat today.
Yeah.
So I had a great conversation at the beginning of the season with Deb about the entire season, the 20th anniversary season. And there were a whole lot of elements of the season that we didn't go into detail about because I said to Deb, I thought it would be interesting to discover that, this production features strong independent women. Right. This production, speaks to a global conversation. And this one has a very specific conversation to talk about just as well. And I think at least this season, theater goers in Philadelphia have been pleasantly surprised at how a part of the conversation our community is this year. And I was just wondering, like, was there a memo? Was there a workshop everybody went to that said, here's the formula for a successful season, and everybody has done it? So all we need to know is if there's a trans character in this show, and then you will have checked all the boxes for the season.
Well, I mean, season planning for any theater company, is often, a year plus out. I'm sometimes committing to do shows at theater companies in the community well a year in advance. And I think, while the idea of Donald Trump becoming president was something inconceivable to most people, in some ways, the idea that his rhetoric or that kind of person was being taken seriously at all was already fairly offensive to people, I think. And when you look back, even in the last few years before that, to look at the rise of whether it's Occupy Wall Street or Black Lives Matters, very different grassroots organizations or very different aims. But I do think the responsibility of being an artist and a citizen has felt more pressing to the artistic community.
Yeah.
And every theater company has their own individual aesthetic. Every theater company has their own principles. But no one goes into this line of work, I put work in quotes, no one takes this vocation, no one goes into this art form with the idea that they're ever going to make a lot of money, when you're working in non-for-profit arts. And so your raison d'etre, your agency, is much more designed about how do you contribute to the world. And as a freelance theater artist who works for all sorts of different kinds of theaters, I think it's equally important at times to give people joy and to make them laugh, as it is to ask them pressing questions about the way we exist in the world, what our responsibilities to each other are, what our failings are, how we can call into question our failings, pointed social art. Yeah. So the range is wide. And, when we were, you and I were going to talk about Midsummer, going into rehearsal for Midsummer just a few days after the inauguration, in some ways I was grateful to be working on a play that wasn't about speaking truth to power.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't designed to be a call to action. It was about people, who were desperately in love, trying to come to peace.
Yeah.
And so I was excited about making something that people could come to and lay the burdens of the world down for 2.5 hours and have fun and hear great language and hear great music and just enjoy themselves. What I took for granted was that in and of itself became a meaningful statement on the world.
Yeah.
To say that we still believe beauty exists. We still believe that harmony is better than discord. And Shakespeare, and that play in particular, provided a great vehicle for that. Similarly, doing Hand to God at PTC, again, a lot of social biting commentary, but also a really ridiculous, crazy, fun evening at the theater. And so both of those pieces, while not political in nature or asking questions specifically about the world that we're dealing with this morning, or every day under this president, they still served as a way for us to put all of those feelings into. And so when you look back a year ago, even though Donald Trump wasn't the president, a lot of this ugliness, a lot of these feelings were percolating in the environment.
Yeah.
And I think everyone, we talk about Trump in a way the way we talk about the weather now. It's sort of inescapable. It's become, it's almost become jargon, bullshit conversation, which is absurd but actually true. And so, in many ways, doing plays like Midsummer, Hand to God, it wouldn't matter whether or not I, as a director, or the theater companies wanted to steer away from any political infraction or political discussion or sociological discussion. It would inevitably be there, because that's what we're bringing to it. So when it comes to taking on a play like Buzzer, a year ago, when we were looking at plays, and I read this play, and one of the things that excited me about it was that it was messy. It didn't feel like it had a convenient hero. It didn't feel like it had a convenient message. It didn't feel like it had a clear outcome. It felt like a messy and pointed conversation on race and economics and community. These things that all are in some ways under assault, have always been under assault. And I was very comfortable with the idea of working on a play that wasn't going to provide some easy answers. And we have this, intimate 50-seat venue. In Chicago, there's a lot of storefront theaters. In Philadelphia, doesn't have a lot of storefront theaters. But I've always sort of prided, the work that we've done at Exile, at least in the last 6 years since we started producing in this space, maybe 7 years, of having our own sort of South Philly storefront theater. It's a garage. And so in that room, you can have very intimate, nuanced conversations with people. And I feel like Tracy Scott Wilson's writing is just that. It's deeply nuanced and psychological, even though the types, are, I think, very familiar, And so I was excited about getting 3 really great actors and being in a very intimate venue that would allow me to have a conversation with an audience about not just race and gentrification at the forefront of the play, obviously. In the end, it really is just a domestic drama about 3 friends. But the issues it brings up, the ugliness it brings up, I often joke about, it's come up a lot in my mind that, there was a great Chappelle Show sketch called When Keeping It Real Goes Wrong.
Yeah.
And that has come up a lot, that the play essentially is about a mixed-race couple, a black man who has made a real success of himself. He works at a high-end law firm, and he's from this bad neighborhood, and got out of that neighborhood with help, got to a boarding school, went to Harvard and Harvard Law, and now that he's made something of himself, he's been with this white woman for a number of years, and he wants to move in with her, and he seeks to buy property in his old neighborhood, which was at one point really bad, crime-ridden, drug-ridden neighborhood,
Yeah.
and is now slowly on the beginning, the outskirts of gentrification. And there is a certain point of pride to go back into this place that he escaped from, this place that didn't eat him up, that didn't kill him, and take ownership of it, and then seek to gain profit off of it. Because if he buys now, the chances are in 10 years that property will be worth substantially more. And the girlfriend who teaches, she's a teacher, and she teaches at an inner city school, is trepidatious not because of the neighborhood, but because of their relationship, and she wants it to be the right time for them, but is ultimately convinced because she can see how good a deal it is. And then into that relationship comes one of Jackson, who's our lawyer, his friend from growing up, a guy he met at the boarding school, rich, privileged white kid whose father kicked him out of a drug habit, and Jackson and his mother took him in this neighborhood. So in the summers when they weren't at the boarding school, Don, who is the friend, they lived together in this neighborhood. And Don, as an addict and a bit of a hustler, finds himself on the street and involved with crime and involved with drugs and really living out there in a way that Jackson, who is studious and trying to make something of himself, is inside reading books. So what Tracy does is sort of pit the stereotypes against each other in a way. That here you have a white guy who comes from means, has all the privilege afforded to him as the son of a rich white man, and yet he's the one that ends up.
And he has the stereotype of Jackson, who on first glance you would assume that Jackson had all of those.
That's right.
And
they're both very history. And both these men are very conscious of that. And yet there's a lot of tension in who has ownership of what this neighborhood was really like. And so to get back to when keeping it real goes wrong, we all have that. We all have our own secure or supposedly secure sense of ourselves and the way we identify the world and where we come from, and maybe just because I work in the theater and you do as well, that you get very comfortable with scripting narrative. That we are very conscious. I find theater artists to be very conscious of the narrative arcs of their lives, but I think that's true of all people. And so Jackson and Don's narrative and the way it's tied to this neighborhood is very different. And the way that they remember the place is very different. And there is a conflict that then emerges while all three of them are living in this new neighborhood, where Suzy becomes harassed on the street by a group of black men on a corner on a regular basis. And who knows how to handle that situation and how to de-escalate the situation. So it becomes one of the core tensions of the play. And what it does is it reveals all these blind spots that we all have, most notably Suzy. As someone who I think comes into the play as, in a relationship with this black man, having a very healthy healthy relationship with her views on race, but they've never been tested in the way that they get tested in this instance. And what that yields in her is a surprise and a discovery. And I think the same is true for Don and for Jackson. And so at the core of what I think Tracy's writing about is the way in which we're not really willing to confront the tough questions within ourselves. And so in trying to come to terms with those things that divide us, particularly on racial lines, that until we are able to reconcile who we really are and how we really feel, and to not be afraid of those feelings, or to be able to be honest about those feelings, to recognize our blind spots, to recognize our ignorance, we can't really ever have a real conversation about how to move forward together. And so while the play is very much about gentrification and what gentrification means to these neighborhoods, I think what she does is she sort of puts these characters in motion to sort of see what will happen in this circumstance. And so you have three very different perspectives, and that all excited me. I grew up in this city my whole life. I grew up in Northeast Philadelphia, and I've been living in Center City since I was 22. And when I was a kid, growing up in the Northeast, I started doing traveling children's theater for the city. So at 14 and 15, I was suddenly going into North Philly and West Philly and being the only white kid for blocks, and doing shows for entirely black audiences, and going back to my very white working class blue collar neighborhood in Northeast Philadelphia, and watching the way in which my friends were receiving racist views from their fathers or their families, and I could see firsthand that it wasn't based on anything.
Yeah.
There wasn't based on any real life experience. It wasn't based on being disgruntled by someone from a different race, or having real actionable opinions about affirmative action or welfare or any of these things that are latently racist when they're trounced. And so that incongruity, I think, has always existed for me, of coming from a blue-collar white neighborhood and yet living and working in a city of mixed people of all backgrounds, immigrants, people of different races, and trying to, within myself, deal with the places where I have blind spots and be open to the world and try to understand where different people come from and not make assumptions. Because that's really where I think we get fucked up, is we make assumptions, oftentimes for good. We're trying to be, whatever it is. I had a conversation with a black friend of mine who, was very supportive of the Women's March, but also questioned, where are those people, when it comes to Black Lives Matter marches. And oftentimes there are the same people. But even when the well-intentioned get called into question, our ability to be frank about that, our ability to have real conversations about that is often limited because, the show, I should say at this point maybe, stars Akeem Davis, Mateo Scammell, and Alex Kuiper. And Akeem said to me, a year ago when we first started, Akeem was the first person I reached out to. I felt like I couldn't do the play without him. Mm-hmm. And we worked together once before in production of Henry V, but we've been eager to collaborate together again. And, Akeem, in addition to being an incredible actor, is also an incredibly outspoken and passionate, smart citizen and advocate.
And he's a great ambassador for every piece of work he is attached to.
He is. He is a passionate guy. And so when we first talked about the play, he had two reactions. One was he thought, I'm going to look up, who's this Tracy Scott Wilson? Who is this white woman? There was something about the play that made him feel like this is written by some white woman. Yeah. And then rationalizing that, it's not a white woman, she's a black woman. And I think some of that was tongue-in-cheek that he, mm-hmm. But then the secondary part of it was what I think he spoke to that I was also interested in, is that really one of the one thing that most white people don't want to be called is racist. That's like it really is the thing that it really is for people who get accused of racism. It is a real. It really does feel like the worst thing that can happen to them from their perspective. Mm-hmm. And so the play, I think Akeem got excited by the fact that the play wasn't calling white people racist, but it was certainly more comfortable with calling everybody involved mm-hmm. racist. That everybody was making assumptions about the neighborhood or the people in the neighborhood or the intentions of the people in the neighborhood that were bent purely on racial lines. And so we got excited about, again, could we tell a story that was messy like that? Again, like I say, the trappings of the play are fairly domestic in a way. Three friends living together. I don't want to give too much of the plot away, but a lot of the tension and conflict in the play arises from a personal place. It doesn't arise from a political place or a sociological place. It arises from a personal place. But set against the backdrop of gentrification and white people moving into a black neighborhood and opening gyms and coffee shops, and the neighborhood slowly being eroded. Yeah. That's the backdrop in which the play is set. So mm-hmm. you can imagine how things might be personal, might start at a personal level, but ultimately confront real world difficulties.
And how very tied to Philadelphia that is, because I mean. We would make a joke where, I live on the corner of 20th and Federal,
right,
where there's a coffee shop and now a yoga studio. So, it might even be a Chappelle joke where it says, here comes the neighborhood. Because now all they have to do is get rid of the bodega across the street, and there's a bistro in my building. So, that whole block is the stereotype of gentrification. And quite often I'll hear longtime residents standing on the corner having the loudest conversations just to prove their place in the community. And it's kind of the equivalent of if you have a roommate who's kind of a slob, and they're not a slob for any reason except for I just need people to know that I live here too. And it's kind of like that. And I've heard many conversations outside where a guy was being yelled at for raising his voice, and he said something like, he was like, "You don't tell me to lower my voice. You just got here." He said, "You just got here."
Well, and it's funny. I mean, even inadvertently in talking about the world of the play, I reference the socio-economic, racial background of my neighborhood growing up, and how that relates to neighborhoods in North Philly that I was going into that were different than mine, and just the way that we readily identify race, economics, as essential to what makes our neighborhoods. And when we talk about neighborhoods as sort of microcosms of community, which are microcosms of the country, this is one of the tensions that we see, is that the generalizations that we make about people who live outside of major cities, the generalizations that they make about people who live in cities. Oftentimes when I find myself in a situation where I'm talking with someone who is, let's say, on the opposite side of the political aisle than myself, I always say that we want the same basic things. Yeah. How we get them, we might disagree on, but taking care of our families, wanting our children to be taken care of, wanting our older people to be taken care of, wanting the trash to be picked up, and wanting drugs and policing to be doing their job, but also accountable. These are not crazy divisional things. But when you burrow down to the sort of bone marrow of it, that's where you can begin to find where these blind spots and our own insecurities, that's down there too. So even though we can want the same basic things and can have basic disagreements about how to achieve those things, buried in our DNA, buried in our deep within ourselves is we all have blind spots. I keep saying blind spots because I think it's more encompassing than just to say, I don't think buried within everyone is a racist, but I think at the heart of racism is your inability to see past skin color, your inability to see past where you come from ethnically. And that's not, to me, that's based on something so deep within you that you can't really reconcile with it. The only way to reconcile with it is to wake up every day, to go into the world and try and engage with people on a human level. Yeah. And we're clearly not there yet. I mean, I would never espouse that everyone who voted for Donald Trump is a racist. They were just comfortable with the fact that he was a racist or that he represented racist ideology. Yeah. And that might be a semantics difference, but I'm trying to be fair to those people and say, no, they just didn't, they didn't see that as a problem.
But that's hard.
And that's a problem.
But that's hard for us to digest as artists because we work for mission-driven organizations. So, I always say, I say two things at work. You either work for us or you don't work for us. And the other thing is, it's like, if you aren't willing to go out there and stand behind this mission, you are wasting our time. You're wasting your own time. Right. So when I hear that I can totally understand when people get frustrated by, they have this conversation where they're trying to basically create a book report on why they're not a racist.
Right, yes.
But they did vote for Trump.
Yes.
And you're just like, yeah, but how do you stand for, how do you, you're basically saying that you stand for that. And this is where we get sort of tied into it as well, too, because he could have some good ideas. They're just, unfortunately, being clouded by all of the, all of the things that he says that we just disagree with, or that we just can't understand, or that we just never expected from someone in the highest office of the land to say, and at least out in front of a hot mic.
Well, and I think that's the, that's a really key distinction, right?
Yeah.
Again, it's because, you see these, these things come up every now and again. Someone like Bill O'Reilly often, will be at the heart of these kinds of things of like, that a lot of what powers these opinions and these feelings is manifest destiny, right? You're responsible for you. Stop telling me it's my fault. That's the feeling, right? That we get it. Louis C.K. has the joke about, how white people had 100 years to slavery every year. I was 500 years ago. No, it wasn't. It was not. It was 140 years ago. It's not that long ago.
Yeah.
And it's not like everything since has been, fantastic. But that need, this very white need to not be wrong, to be able to say, I'm not doing anything wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. Nobody gives me anything. I go out there and work for, you want to go, you got to go out there and earn it. That inherent misunderstanding of what privilege means, that misunderstanding of what you've never had to face as a white person, and feeling that is so true.
Yeah.
Like, yes, I understand you've been wronged. Yes, I understand the police treat you badly. Yes, I understand that there are things that are said against you that I don't get. But at the end of the day, that leap is what is a big part of the problem. And I think what Tracy Scott Wilson is writing about is that is true for everyone.
Yeah.
White people and black people. And that even from well-intentioned places, we still aren't free enough within ourselves or within our communities, or trust ourselves enough to really be honest about where we have those blind spots, where we are not, we're still not there.
Yeah.
And I don't know, that this is I was, this expression post-racial, I don't believe in. I think it misses the point to suggest that there's some place we would get to that is beyond race. Mm-hmm. I think that's nonsense. I think it encourages us to act as if everything else that came before didn't happen. And I think a lot of white people, that's desperately what they want. They want to be as far away from the past as possible because it's not a good look. Yeah. It's not good. And that's where I think that I actually think the only way that we come together more is to live with, like any relationship, I've been married, and with the same woman for, almost 13 years. We've done things wrong to each other. I've done things wrong to people that I still have deep relationships with. That's just a part of who we are now.
Yeah.
You don't forget that.
Yeah, you can't let it go. It's not like you. It's not like the finance department where there's only so many years where you get to hold these files, and now you have to let them go.
It's a part of who we are, and again, that's why, to go back to Akeem's point about, the last thing any well-intentioned white person wants to be called is racist.
Yeah.
But the truth is that, I'm not going to sit here to you and say that I'm not racist, that I haven't done racist things in my life, or that I still don't make judgments about people of other races out of ignorance. That would be, I don't feel good saying that. I'm just being honest. I certainly am not going into the world every day, or when I'm engaging with the rest of humanity. I don't want to be ignorant to anyone I deal with. I don't want to bring that energy into something. But to sit here and look you in the eye and say that, in the nearly 40 years I've been on this planet that I haven't done something out of ignorance, out of my own ignorance, or said something out of my own ignorance, or taken action out of my own ignorance. That would be a lie. Yeah. And I'm not comfortable with that when I make those mistakes. And I hope to God that every day I do the right thing. But I have to engage with that. I can't just wish it away.
Yeah.
I can't just act like, oh, why did I make that assumption about that person? Mm-hmm. Or why did I make that assumption about that person? And it's true. It's not just race. It can be true about sexuality as well. I mean, we're in an age of really becoming more accepting and open to what sexuality can be.
And what relationships are.
And what relationships
There's
are, right.
a time where an interracial relationship meant something else.
Yes.
I mean, there's even a criticism now that an interracial relationship is an escape from one's culture.
Right, right.
But, not realizing that maybe the reason these two different people came together is because of an interest in each other's culture,
Right.
And maybe a wanting to know more or to embrace or understand more.
Yes.
And finding out, wait, we have a lot of common... There's a lot of similarities in our backgrounds, whether we went to college together or we grew up in the same town or just happened to, arrive in the same city at the same time. And there's so many different ways for people to connect that don't have to do with skin color, or ethnicity, background.
And I think it's where when you make that connection with someone and your truth, you have to actually navigate your truth, and deal with it, and that's all I mean to say is that you have to be held accountable by your actions, and in a relationship, those actions are tested and examined in ways that you can't prepare for. Because when you give yourself over to somebody, you're doing that in a trusting way, in a vulnerable way, and that's certainly is one of the things that happens in this play. It's easy, with all of the big issues that the play raises, the fact that it is about a mixed race couple, that it's hard to not in the zeitgeist. Get Out has come up a lot, because Get Out is this kind of fantastical, and yet pointed social commentary on a mixed race couple and what the interest of that woman is in that black man. And in some ways, Buzzer has nothing to do with that movie content-wise, or even commentary-wise specifically. And yet there is a spiritual kinship to that what Jordan Peele is examining, Tracy Scott Wilson is also examining, which is like, it's all well and good, but what happens when you have to get real about it? The idea that in Get Out, the notion that, hey, I would have voted for Obama a third term if I could have. That is this code for a white guy to say, I'm down.
I'm a good guy.
I'm a good guy. I'm down. I get it.
Yeah.
And I think that that there's an exchange like that in Buzzer, not about Obama, but there is an exchange that is about experience, and one of the characters says, I hate it when you condescend to me about race. And the other character says, who's saying about race? I wasn't talking about race. And I find that to be a really telling example of what I'm talking about, that we project certain fears and we lie about certain fears, and until we are able to be comfortable enough to talk about those things honestly, this gets back to where we started about season planning and why a lot of these, you made that comment about the checking of boxes, while I don't think the community or theater companies as a whole are legitimately checking boxes, I think when you read a play and you go, well, what is our company about? We do these stories that have great immediacy, and they're very intimate, and they require great psychological performances from actors, sometimes violent performances from actors. These are the kinds of plays that Theater Exile has done over the years. And looking at a season of plays, there might have been a year where I would have done a revival of This Is Our Youth. I love Kenneth Lonergan. I love that play. It's the kind of play we would do. But the opportunity to have a conversation with an audience through the prism of not another white guy, but through Tracy Scott Wilson, who I think is one of the best playwrights of the last decade. Her output hasn't been as much because she's been in TV, but she writes for The Americans, which is one of my favorite shows. I think she's a great writer, and the fact that she's a black woman, I think to have that voice in our season felt more important this time last year than it had previously.
Yeah.
The company, it's the thing about our community, is really not that old. A lot of the things that get said to each other about the Philadelphia theater community is it takes for granted that, in fact, this is Theater Exile's 20th anniversary season. I know that may sound like a lot of years, but it's really not in the grand scheme of things.
And even I think the oldest activated organization is probably about 35 years.
Well, People's Light would go back further, but even still, I think what I was going to say about Exile is 20th season from when we first started producing, but we weren't doing seasons, until 16 years ago, 15 years ago, 14 years ago. It's not, and my only point in bringing that up is that it's not that Theater Exile as a company has been slow to respond. You have a specific aesthetic. Interact has a much more political aesthetic than the Arden or the Wilma even. And so the conversation that Seth has been having with his audience for over 25 years is organized around very different principles than the conversation that Theater Exile has been having with its audience. Blanca is doing this now with the Wilma, where she's trying to change that conversation a little bit. She's trying to get back more to the European roots of what that theater, I think, was at its beginning. So artists are in a constant state of evolution, but when you're trying to pin down specifically who people are and what they should do, that doesn't fit that narrative.
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm saying is that I don't think that theater companies are checking boxes or trying to appeal to a more inclusive conversation. I just think theater companies are responding to the world, and I think what you're seeing in a lot of the programming this year suggests that, in the last year and a half, it's not. I don't think it's that theater companies or theater artists are getting woke. I think that it's a part of our condition to try and be woke. Yeah. Because we have to be responsive to the world. And we either are making a decision to be a part of a conversation or to offer you an alleviation from the tension of that conversation. But I just think that one of the reasons why Buzzer felt important to do is because it just felt like, I don't know that I want to have a conversation with an audience that's just about white kids in the 80s in New York. Even though I think it's a really funny play, and what it has to say, and what This Is Our Youth has to say about growing up, I think is some of the most poignant stuff Kenneth Lonergan's ever written. Kenneth Lonergan has been back in our culture because of Manchester by the Sea. He's a playwright that's important, but I think what the story that Tracy was telling and the opportunity I would have to collaborate with Akeem felt like it was more important to me. And on the flip side, it's not just Akeem. Like, to have a chance to put Mateo, Alex, and Akeem in a play together. Yeah. These are three of the best young actors in our community. They've all offered incredible performances all over the city. So to put them in a really intimate venue and let them go at it over really difficult subjects, that Alex and Mateo didn't become a part of it until later, but I knew going in that was what I was going to seek to do, was like put Akeem on stage with two really, really dynamic people and see what happens with Tracy's writing. Yeah. And I think we're doing that. I think that audiences that come to see the play will, it's an hour and a half. It's not long, intermissionless, and I think that the energy that the play creates and the discussions that will be had afterward, I think are really important, and they'll be charged. And I think people will be. I think people will be angry at the play at times. I think people will be angry at the characters. And that's something, again, that we've become less and less comfortable with. We've become less and less comfortable with, we've become less and less comfortable with things that don't do everything we want them to do. Yeah. That fit that box. I think in a retweet, like, share, age, if it doesn't fit our narrative, if it doesn't fit what we have endorsed publicly, it's complicated. It becomes more complicated for us. And I think Tracy is purposely fucking with that. She's having the characters do things that we are collectively going to disapprove of. Yeah. All of the characters. And so I think it has the potential to be an exciting evening at the theater, is what I think.
Well, one of the things I always look forward to when I come to a Theater Exile production is my walk home. Because, I do spend a lot of time, like, processing what I just experienced.
Yeah.
And, I've been here where there are elements of a play where it's too much for an audience member and they've got to walk out.
Yep.
And, I've been here in the lobby where I hear, like, I love you guys, but I hated this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I've my revolving list of plus ones that get to come with me. We've had really great conversations for the stories that have been mounted here, and I think this one will be no exception. This will not disappoint as well.
Yeah.
I think you kind of answered it, but I always wrap up saying, what do you hope an audience will take away from this experience?
I hope that they will be. I hope that they will be charged up to ask of themselves what they would do. I think that too often we're not really willing to put ourselves in other people's shoes. We become much more, again, in the social media age, the Monday morning quarterbacking of the world is a comfortable disposition.
Yeah.
From our couches, from the safety of our home, the judgment that we will land on other people, every day that it comes up. And so I hope that what the audience will take away from it is that what would they do in those circumstances? And are they being honest with themselves when they ask that question? And I think that is the nature and purpose of art, is to ask big questions of an audience and not give them any convenient answers. And Buzzer decidedly does not do that.
Yeah.
It again, I don't want to spoil anything, but I do feel like the play ends on a note that is one of the more uncomfortable and difficult notes I've ever ended a play on. I think the ending is it's not a shocking ending. It's an uncomfortable ending. It's an ending but I think what Tracy wrote is true. And so the fact that it's true and the fact that it's uncomfortable, I think she, as a dramatist, has chosen to end the play on that note, which suggests to me that what she wants the audience to walk out with is not being indicted, but charging them with the task of indicting themselves.
Yeah.
And will they choose to look deeply at what makes them tick?
Well, it sounds like we're all going to look like critics in the audience because everyone's going to have a notepad and everyone's going to have a pencil.
That's true.
So that they can jot down notes and write questions. But come be a part of this conversation. The production is Buzzer. Is written by Tracy Scott Wilson, directed by Matt Pfeiffer, produced by Theater Exile. And the production is running now through May 28th. And you can get your tickets by going to theaterexile.org. Come be a part of the 20th anniversary season here if you're not already on that list. Matt, it's always a pleasure to sit and chat with you. I barely have to say much. But
Sorry about that.
You check. No, it's fine. You check all my boxes, answer all my questions. So I'm just like, okay, so what do you want an audience to take away from this? Because you've answered everything.
I'm sorry that I'm the bloviating white guy.
I enjoy that. I love creating this platform for people to really dive into the why of the work. And I've always said, it's my intention that Rep Radio leads with the why. So that people understand that. So when they walk into the theater, they have that sense going on in their heads. And it does sort of get those gears going so that they can continue that conversation when they go home and tell a friend that they loved it or they hated it and be able to speak intelligently as to why.
Yeah.
And, I feel like every time I tell someone I'm fortunate at my day job. There's quite a few theater people at my day job. Whenever I talk to them about what I just saw, I have a deeper feeling for what I just experienced, because now I'm explaining it to someone else, and now I've added so much more to it.
It's what makes our art form so essential. It's still one of the few things left in culture that requires you to be in a room with other people.
Yes.
And I do think that innately we all feel that. We all feel that desire to want to put the phone down, to turn the cable off, to get outside, to go someplace where you can sit in a room and experience something with people and then think about the world. And I think now than ever it's more important than I've ever felt in my life. And I think it's because we just have, even well-intentioned people, I think, are not as concerned with context and intention.
Yeah.
And theater is about the examination of that. It gives you a context to examine intention. And again, that's why I hope that people will come and not make judgments about these characters, but actually try to ask the critical questions that I think the playwright is asking about us as people.
Yeah. I think Theater Philadelphia should create a poster or a banner that just says Netflix can wait.
or you know when that little prompt comes up to go to the next one, take a break.
Yeah.
Go do something else. It's better for you.
It's like, here's what's going on in your world. Are you sure you want to continue into episode 7? Because you didn't really process episode 5, and you were folding laundry during episode 4. So, just so that you can post on social media that you're done. Surprise yourself. But I look forward to saying tonight's experience.
Yeah.
And really settling into the great work that Philadelphia theaters have to offer. Yeah. So awesome. I'm looking forward to this. I already have my tickets, and I can't wait to see it.
Thanks, Darren.
Okay, thanks a lot, man. Right. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Rep Radio is inspired by our community and listeners like you. Our operation is a fiscally sponsored project of Fractured Atlas. Show your support by making a tax-deductible contribution at repradio.org/support. To join our team or communicate with us, drop us a line at repradio.org. Stay tuned. Rep Radio is on the air.